All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to the Majesty of Reason. I'm Joe Schmid, and today we're talking about how to do research in philosophy, how to write philosophy papers, and ultimately how to publish philosophy papers, as well as how to publish philosophy books. Many thanks to Suan from the Intellectual Catholicism YouTube channel for allowing me to repost this. It was a really helpful discussion, and I hope you guys get something out of it.
Welcome to this episode of Intellectual Catholicism. Today I'm here with my good friend Joe Schmid to talk about how to be published as an undergrad. And of course, the audience of the episode today is primarily undergraduate students, but also just for people who want to know like how to write a good philosophy paper, how to, get your voice out there and really meet the standards of academic rigor. And so I can say for a fact, this comment really made me laugh. It's from Kyle Myers with the FPS Russia profile picture. He says, you just got to have an IQ of 130 plus. Well, I don't know about you, Joe, or myself, but I think it's safe to say that I think it takes a lot of hard work and just being committed with it. And so I don't want anyone to feel intimidated. And that's the whole point of the episode, to let people know they can do philosophy as well. So, Joe, how are you doing?
I am doing fine. I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to talk about this because it's a fun topic.
All right, yeah. So, Joe, can you talk about the two books that you have published right now?
Yeah, so my first book, which I published way back in, I think, either 2019 or 2020, I kind of forget, but, and I practiced pointing the right direction before this, and I better get it right this time. I got it right. Okay, so yes, that's the first one. Is called The Majesty of Reason, a short guide to critical thinking and philosophy. I start off talking about the methods and skills of critical thinking, as well as different intellectual and even moral virtues that you need to cultivate in order to engage in discussions of these sorts. And then I go into, logic and critical thinking and how to do philosophy. And then we look at different case studies in there, like applying the methods and skills and tools to scientism and the laws of nature and other sorts of debates. So that's the first book. And then the second book was just published. The publication year is 2023. It is right here, Existential Inertia and Classical Theistic Proofs, published with Springer and co-authored with Dr. Daniel J. Linford. We basically have three main goals in the book. The first one is to critically assess various classical theistic arguments for God's existence. So arguments from people like Edward Feser, Gavin Kerr, or Kerr, lots of others, Aquinas' Deante argument, Aquinas' first way. So that's the first goal. The second goal is to give the first book-length treatment of the thesis of existential inertia, which is roughly the thesis that at least some temporal concrete things persist without being continuously sustained from outside of themselves. And then the third project was to look at some new arguments pertaining to classical theism. So we looked at divine temporality and like theistic conceptualism and things like that. So yeah, that's the three main aims of the book, and yeah.
And Joe, how many papers do you have published right now?
Yeah, so right now, so fully published, it's 9 right now, but fingers crossed, I've had a lot under review for the past months, and the review process, it takes so long. That's one thing that's so annoying about philosophy. It takes so long. But so fingers crossed in the new year, and hopefully coming up soon, I'll have some more.
Yeah, so Joe, tell me about well, actually, before we go on, I just wanted to mention too that I have two papers published. So one paper, well, I don't know if you really count the first one, but it's with Cornell University's Logos undergraduate journal. Mm-hmm. So I had that one published, and I won third place in their prize, and that was during my freshman year in college. And then the other paper I have published is a defense of Vatican I papal theology in the Haythrop Journal. In response to Jerry Walls. And so that one's kind of like the big boy publication, if you know what I mean. So there's that one. And then, I think I'm finally ready to write a book on a lot of the research I've been doing on the papacy.
Yes, so, I'm very excited. That's awesome.
Yeah, and so I'll be talking about that further down the line, but I just want to tease it out right now.
I can't wait.
Like I'm actually talking. Well, I'm working on talking to a publisher, and I have some friends who are helping me out, and so it's really, I think this is the attempt that I'm going to make to really get it down in print.
Awesome.
Well, Joe, so I think the first thing that people are going to wonder about is, how do you get a paper published? What hoops and, do you have to go through in order to get a paper published? What's the process?
Yeah. So step one, You have to sell your soul, step 2. No, yeah, so I mean, the whole process, it's a long process, right? So you have the process before writing the paper, you have the process of writing the paper, you have the process of submitting the paper, and then you have the post-submission process. So we could probably go through each of those in turn. So before writing the paper, you basically have to have an idea, right? You need to have an idea of what you're doing, what you want to write on, and things like that. How do you get ideas? Well, you read philosophy, you read papers, you read books, you talk to people on internet forums, you watch YouTube videos, you watch intellectual Catholicism, you watch Majesty of Reason, you immediately subscribe to them and turn on the notifications. You discuss these matters with your classmates, with your professors in office hours. You discuss it with maybe in emails with professional philosophers. You think hard about these things, you reflect on them. And yeah, that's how you sort of generate ideas. Another way to generate ideas is to go to various journals, like within your topic of interest. So let's say you're interested in philosophy of religion, then you could go to the International Journal for Philosophy of Religion, or Religious Studies, or Faith and Philosophy. Those are the 3 kind of biggest philosophy of religion journals, and you can look at some of their recent publications. Look at some of the stuff that's going on in the field, and you can read those papers, and if you've got a response to them, that's another idea, right? So another idea is to respond to papers that have recently been published. And the basic idea for your ideas here at this stage before writing is you want them to be, first, cutting edge. So they need to be kind of at the edge of research. They need to be doing like newish research. So they need to contribute to human knowledge in some way. Secondly, they need to be relevant. So they need to be relevant to philosophy, relevant to the field. Like, why are you researching this? Why does it matter? Mm-hmm. Thirdly, it needs to be significant, right? So it's not like you can't write a paper saying, Joe, on page 10 of this paper, spelled perspicacious incorrectly. That's not significant. Okay, that is not significant. It needs to be a significant idea. So like, hey, here's a new argument for the papacy, or hey, here's a new objection to this popular argument, or these sorts of things. Or here's a new assumption that we've all overlooked in debates about internalism versus externalism, or whatever. Mm-hmm. So it needs to be significant. It needs to, like I said, advance the discussion. So it needs to take us beyond what we have so far. And it needs to be publishable. So the idea needs to be publishable. And I guess publishability is kind of a mixture of all those together with the packaging of it, right? The way that you write and the way that you engage with the pre-existent literature. So that's before writing, you need to have the idea. It's it's difficult, right? But you need to have the idea. Before writing, you also need to have an outline, or at least I think you should probably get an outline. That's the best thing to do. So what does an outline do? Well, kind of wears on its sleeve what it does. It outlines your paper. So, you have like the introduction, you'll say, you'll situate the topic. You'll give some citations about recent literature. You'll talk about why this is significant, all very brief and concise. And then you'll give an outline. Within your outline, you should write that you're going to outline the rest of the structure of your paper.
Right.
And then you go on to the next section, which is like, let's say you're developing the argument. Then the next section, let's say you're responding to objections. And then the final section, you might point out avenues for new research, and then you conclude or whatever. And so, yeah, your outline, that is super duper important. So you need to make an outline. You also need to do research, right? So that's another huge topic, and that's
impossible.
Again, yeah, exactly. That is before writing as well. So like I suggest before writing, you need to do some research. You need to look up papers, look up books on the relevant topic. You can search key terms, you can search for papers, you can search for these sorts of things in various philosophy databases. So things like philpapers.org, things like Google Scholar, things like academia.edu, things like JSTOR. You can also ask researchers in the area for relevant books or articles. That is a very, very good thing, because like if you're new to this sort of stuff, if you're an undergrad, you're new to this stuff, right? So you're not going to be aware of the most relevant research. I mean, of course, you're going to get a good glimpse if you research or if you search key terms and papers of what I just mentioned, but you should talk to some researchers who are in this area, maybe email them or just message them on Facebook. Be like, hey, I want to, go on.
Well, I wanted to add that, a lot of people are, ask me on the channel, like, Suan, how do you get in touch with all these philosophers and thinkers? And you'd be surprised how if you just email them, they're very willing to respond, as long as your email is to the point and not like insulting them or crazy, Yeah. Like the other day, I had an email correspondence with Richard Swinburne. And for a lot of people, that's like crazy. But no, I mean, he's really willing to kind of respond and share his opinions and things like that. So a lot of these people are really eager to help you.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great addition. It's intimidating at first, right? Because these are like seasoned scholars in the field. But yeah, I've also found that for the most part, when you reach out to them, they're very willing to help. So it's wonderful. So yeah, ask researchers in the area for like relevant books or articles. Be like, I have this idea. Do you think this is publishable? What ways could I proceed forward? What like books and articles should I read, or like chapters, things like that. Research widely as well. So yeah, definitely research widely. Don't just do it super duper narrowly. I guess another thing to do is when you find a paper of interest, go look at its references, right? Go look at its references, find the references in there and see what it's researching, and keep on doing that for different articles. A good place to start as well that I forgot to mention on a topic is, if you want like an overview, go to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy or go to the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Those are very good. They give very good overviews of various topics and arguments in philosophy. So those are very good as well, and they give you resources at the end. Philosophy Compass is also a journal that publishes like reasonably accessible introductions to topics as well. And then as you're gathering these papers, what I do is you need organization, right? So you need to put them all in a document or something like that. Usually what I do is I gather a bunch of resources first, and then I put them in the document. And then I go through them. I'll take notes on some of them. Some of them will be more salient than others. I'll like mark which ones are more salient. I'll try to like demarcate them into different branches. So like this one is about the first premise of my argument. So I lump all those resources together. These resources are about the second premise of my argument. So I'm going to lump all those together. And then, yeah, you just systematically proceed through them. It takes a while, but, read through them, take notes where appropriate. And to get a glimpse of them, right, you read the abstract, and that'll usually give you a sense of whether or not it's going to be relevant to your paper. And you don't always have to read the full paper. It might just be a section that's relevant, etc. So anyway, that's the research portion. And sometimes that's intermingled. Like I usually do the research intermingled with the outline, like in my outline, I'd be like, oh, I need to engage with such and such paper here. And I'll like note that in my outline. So like these two, the research and the outline are kind of fluid with one another. Sometimes I do the research first and then do the outline. Sometimes I do the outline first and then do the research. Sometimes they're intermingled. It really all just depends. So that's all before writing.
Yeah, right.
So that kind of concludes the section that's before writing. Then there's the writing process itself. The good thing is that if you have a good outline, the paper writes itself. So that's the best thing about the outline. I mean, if you do the outline, the paper will write itself. I mean, especially the way that I like to do outlines, like I have my main argument there, and I basically, like, my paragraphs correspond to points in the outline. So I'll be like, I'll have like objection, and then I'll just do like my own Joe speak, like premise 1 is allegedly question begging, and then under that I'll be like 3 responses. Premise 1, no, it's independently justified. Premise 2, no, this rests on an equivocation. And 3, and so like each of those corresponds to a paragraph of itself. So it's like super duper easy once you have a good outline to just make paragraphs based on that. And it's super duper helpful because you front loaded your thinking, right? So now you're just kind of trying to put it into words. So yeah, using your outline when you're writing is very good. What characteristics should your writing have? First thing, it should be really well structured. So philosophers love to signpost. It's wonderful. Signposting is basically walking your reader step by step, taking their hand and holding them and walking them through your paper. It sounds weird when people are just getting started. When we're just starting into philosophy, it can be weird. They're like, okay, so now I'm going to argue for this premise.
Yeah.
And then they argue for it, and then like, okay, so I just finished arguing for the premise. Now I'm going to consider an objection. Like, it sounds so weird to like the people who are like into like literature and things like that. Like, this is not how you write, but yes, in philosophy, that is how you write. So,
Joe, and I would just want to add here too that I think sometimes like when you're writing a paper, you kind of think like, oh, well, I don't have to explicitly make this point, clear because it's just kind of obvious, right? It's implied, and it's like, no, your reader is going to probably miss it. My philosophy instructor who helped me become a better writer, he said in the beginning of class, and this was like the mantra of every single class, your reader is an idiot. Yes. That's how you have to write.
Not just an idiot. They are, so I've been told that, but also they are mean, lazy, and stupid, right? So they're mean as well. They're going to interpret you as uncharitably as possible, right? So think about this. If you have this in mind, you're thinking them as mean, lazy, and dang it, I forgot. Oh, stupid. Mean, lazy, and stupid. Yeah. So if they're mean, they're going to interpret everything you say. If it's ambiguous, they're going to interpret it in the
worst way.
The worst way, the uncharitable one. So you have to be constantly on the lookout for that. They are lazy, right? So that means they're not going to do these implicit inferences. You think it obviously follows from this that B. No, kind of spell it out for them, right? Because they're lazy, right? And they're also stupid, right? So they don't see that. We're talking about a hypothetical reader, and this is how you write philosophy. You write philosophy as if your reader is mean, lazy, and stupid. So that's an excellent point, yes. So it needs to be, I think one of my professors at Purdue, who was, he's outstanding, does medieval philosophy, his name is Jeff Brower. And he called this kind of philosophy, and it's what drew him to like being interested in like medieval philosophy, because they have like a kind of quasi-analytic philosophy. You know, it's he called it, I think, Beale philosophy, because it's like just the skeleton or something. I don't know. He called it something like that. It was funny. But yeah, it's like the signposting is you're telling your reader where you're going. I'm now giving an argument. Here's the argument. Here's the first premise. Here's the second premise. Here's the third premise. There are 3 objections. Here's the first objection. Here's my response. Here's the second objection. Yeah. It's very methodical. It's very structured. And you signpost. You tell them what you're doing. So yeah, structure and signpost. Those are big. And mean, lazy, and stupid, your reader. Okay. Another characteristic of your writing is that it has to be very clear, right? That has to do with the mean, lazy, and stupid thing, but just be clear. There might be ambiguities. Try to remove the ambiguities. Try to be clear. Also, try to be precise, right? So in addition to being clear, try to be precise in your speech. Try to really pinpoint what you are saying and say it with the requisite precision. Another characteristic of your writing is that, well, this one kind of varies by topic, but like rigor is usually expected in philosophy. So like you're generally expected to like give an argument and, you know, formalize it, make sure that it's valid, you know, make sure that the conclusion follows from the premises. You're not just giving a kind of informal, you know, diatribe or like stream of consciousness sort of thing, but you're showing the systematic connections between ideas, and that requires you to be rigorous. It requires you to roll up your sleeves and show that, hey, that conclusion does follow from those premises. And so that takes a kind of rigor. So you need to understand some logic before you, at least, you know, just kind of basic deductive logic, you know, like if A then B, A therefore B, those sorts of things, and the various inference rules. So yeah, that's also very important. Also important is concision. So being concise. And what I mean by that is, I don't mean a short paper. Oftentimes, like you in order to go to town on a topic, you have to write a long paper. You have to address all the objections. You have to address, you have to define your terms. You have to do that. So when I say concise, I don't mean brief. I mean appropriately brief, right? It has to be appropriate for the task at hand. And what it also means is that don't include all this fluff. Like, ever since the dawn of time, humanity has pondered the question of God's existence. And do not write like that.
Cut it out.
Like, if an editor sees that, you are getting a desk rejection. What that means is that they are not even going to send it out for review. You're going to hear back a few days after you submitted it saying, I mean, they're not going to tell you why, but that's going to be why they're going to reject it. So do not write with fluff. That is the most annoying thing. When I see that, I roll my eyes and I click away from the screen. I immediately do not read the paper. Okay, another characteristic of your writing is that it needs to be scholarly. What does that mean? It means no insults. It means no chest thumping. It means you know, be cautious with your words in general. Like again, if your reader is mean, lazy, and stupid, like assume that they disagree with you. So you generally want to stay away from saying like, if you reject this conclusion, you're irrational, or I have demonstrably proved this thing, because you need to assume that the reviewers, in order for your paper to get accepted, right, it needs to go through the reviewers, and they're probably going to send it to people who disagree with you. So firstly, just as a matter of practicality. Secondly, you probably shouldn't be that confident in your conclusions. And thirdly, it's just more welcoming. It's more scholarly if you don't have like these sorts of triumphalistic words.
Yeah, like absolutely destroy or something like that.
Definitely don't say debunk, don't say destroy, don't say... I mean, I would even advise staying away from like, you know, colorful adjectives like demonstrable and things like that, and like proof and refute. You know, just say in the terms of like, here's my argument. Like, don't say proof, or here's my objection instead of here's my refutation of your proof. You know, so just be cautious with your words. Be scholarly. No insults. None of that. No chest thumping. No triumphalism, etc. And occasionally, as you get into the reins, as you start publishing more, you can add a little bit of flair, right? So that's something that I really like about philosophy, is that once you start getting into the grip of things, once you've got down the basics, you can add occasional puns. You can add some jokes. You can add some lightheartedness here and there. You can add, you can add things like that. And you can add fun stories. So like when you're doing thought experiments, right? You get to kind of construct a thought experiment of yourself. You can be kind of creative. It's almost like creative writing. I mean, again, don't make it super duper fluff. Like, don't talk about the color of the shoelaces of the person, but you could still make it reasonable. And yeah, I mean, that's something that's fun about philosophy. So you can add flair, but just I would wait to do that until you've got the grips on how to write these sorts of papers and publish. So that's characteristics of your writing.
Mm-hmm.
You also have the writing process. That's going to look differently for different people. I'm not here to tell people the best way to do their writing process. You might want to do a Pomodoro technique, where you do like 25-minute blocks and you just get like a 5-minute reward, and then you do 25 minutes. You might just try to do deep work, so you try to get that state of flow where you're just totally absorbed in your writing, maybe for like 2 hours on end, maybe 3 hours, even 4 hours. It just looks differently for different people, and that'll be individual specific. So yeah, the writing process, and again, like you're integrating, you're synthesizing all the stuff from your research, from your outline. You probably have multiple documents open. So also, once you've written your paper, this is super duper important. Get feedback. Feedback. I'm going to say it a third time. Get feedback. So get feedback before you submit your paper. It's just so important. So like if you're an undergrad, you try to find a professor and ask, professors are so busy, but so it might be difficult, but try to get a professor, try to get someone to read your paper and give you feedback. Maybe one of your peers, maybe a grad student, maybe someone online, maybe a professor, maybe just try to get someone who's in the know, who knows about the topic, and who is something like, more in the field than you are. Try to get them to give feedback before submission, because spoiler alert, there will be criticisms and problems with your paper of which you're unaware. There will be, okay? There just will be. So you need another pair of eyes, perhaps multiple pairs of eyes. So that's just super duper important. And I mean, again, it's fine if you ask a peer, but like, again, if you really want to advance in philosophy, you need to be sending it to like a professor or a grad student, or, like people who are in the know. So yeah, that's another thing. Oh, and also, like just standard writing conventions. Do not have your paper. I mean, again, you might have 1 or 2 spelling errors. That's fine. But like, this is publishing business. Like, you need to have a very good paper. It needs to be polished. Read through it multiple times before submission. Define your terms, etc. So that's the writing process. Any comments on that before we go to the submission stuff?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually my favorite part, is the writing process, because I really part of my past work has been actually as an editor. And, when I had to edit my own papers, I had a lot of fun. But like when you were talking about, for example, let's say concision, my professor who taught me, he said basically, let paragraphs do paragraph-sized jobs and let sentences do sentence-sized jobs, right? So sometimes you're trying to write a sentence and you have too many contractions and ands and yets and buts, right? And then what happens is that the reader gets lost in the sea of just this one sentence, And so every paragraph has to have meaning. It has to be justified why you have this paragraph here, why this sentence is there, right? You can't just, have a paragraph. Well, sometimes, usually you don't want to do like asides or like just random kind of off-topic things. I'd probably say never do that unless it's somehow kind of relevant, right? But that's risky. It's really good if you just stick right to the point and get to the argument, the meat and bones, and, all that you need for it. Yeah. And then regarding feedback, I'll just say that, it's really surprising when you go through having someone look over your paper, because then they'll see things that you could not have possibly seen on your own. And other times too, like you need to take a step back and maybe give yourself like a day before you look at your paper again. And then all of a sudden things will jump out at you that you didn't see before.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, and I mean, we could talk about the reviewers.
We'll get to that
here, or we can do that later. What do you want to do?
So I just want to build on what you just said for a second. I was taking notes quite vigorously over here because you spawned some great ideas. So that was really good. So firstly, with respect to sentences, when in doubt, break it up. Okay. When in doubt, break it up. That's what I say. When I look at many undergrad essays and so on, oh man, it's like fragments upon fragments upon it's either fragment. No, I said fragment. It's run-ons. It's run-ons upon run-ons upon run-ons. These run-on sentences were like and, but, and things like, it's like you lose track of what's going on. So when in doubt, break it up. It's fine to have simple sentences. It's fine to be like, here's the first objection. That's a perfectly fine sentence. You don't say, here's the first objection, and you just say something about like, no, it's a perfectly fine sentence. So like when in doubt, break it up. That's fine. As for paragraph structure, yeah, I mean, generally try to have your paragraphs be on like one main topic. So that'll usually be the first sentence of your paragraph, be on like the main topic of that, and then try to flesh it out, and then maybe a concluding sentence for that paragraph, which is kind of like either bridging into the next paragraph or kind of summing up, or maybe both, summing up what you just said in that paragraph, etc. So that's not a hard and fast rule. That can sometimes, I mean, that can very often be broken. You'll get a grip as to when it should or shouldn't be broken as you write more, etc., and as you read more. That's another thing. Take like mental notes when you're reading these papers and reading these books of other professional philosophers. Kind of take mental notes about how they write, what goes in their footnotes, like what seems to be footnote worthy versus what seems to be main paragraph worthy, what terms they're defining, how they structure their papers, how they reference others, how they construct arguments. Like really pay attention to that. When you do that, it'll just sort of kind of like through osmosis, like go into your own mind, and you'll sort of get a grip as to how to write papers better. So like kind of like when you're reading these papers, don't just focus on their content, but also focus on their structure, their form, their all these other features, because that can proactively influence you. Another point, 2 more points briefly before we go on to the submission process, is on footnotes. So footnotes, generally try to minimize them, generally try to make them short. They're totally fine though to include. Oftentimes you need them for citations. So in your main text, oftentimes you have a kind of flow. You've got a flow paragraph, it looks nice, and if you dumped in like 12 citations at one point, it completely breaks up the flow of the paragraph. So sometimes you need to do that in a footnote. You need to show that you're aware of this literature, and you're like, hey, I'm assuming here this view about the essentiality of origins. This view is defended in X, but there are some detractors, and they are X, Y, and Z. For a response to detractors, CW. Like that's a perfectly good footnote, right? It shows that you're aware of the literature, you're pointing out an assumption that you just made, and you're showing that like, listen, I recognize that that's an assumption, and I'm not going to defend it. If you want to look at other places, here are some places. So like, know what's good for a footnote, and again, generally try to minimize them, but they're for when like you suspect that a slightly irrelevant thing might come up in a reviewer's mind. Like that's what happens to me so much. It's like there's this objection which I know is kind of dumb, but like I know that someone's going to bring it up, so I'm like, okay, you go in a footnote. So like someone might object at this juncture that P, but that of course rests on an equivocation, and so then you spell that out. So yeah, footnotes are generally for things like references, for flagging assumptions, for responding to like slightly irrelevant or kind of slightly stupid objections that you suspect will come up in the reviewer's minds, those sorts of things. And sometimes for like clarifications, or like reminding someone like, hey, I argued for this claim earlier on. So if you forget that, which you're liable to do because you're mean, lazy, and stupid, so like just see that first section. So like those sorts of things. Okay, that's footnotes. Again, we're trying to minimize them, and I would very strongly recommend not having a footnote that is more than one paragraph, more than one normal paragraph.
Right.
You sometimes see footnotes, and they go on for like 4 paragraphs, and it's like, dude, either put it in the main text or take it out. That is not for a footnote. Okay, so I would limit them to 1 paragraph generally. Again, sometimes there will be exceptions, but that's very rare. Okay. And then finally, the final thing is patience, right? Be patient with yourself, with the writing process. Everyone's different. It might be disheartening, when you're looking around, you're seeing grad students and professional philosophers publish and so on. But it's, just patience. Just be patient, okay? This is a process. You're growing, you're learning. Don't be too hard on yourself. Patience is key. Patience with yourself. Patience with others. If you're getting their feedback, they are helping you. They're going out of your way. They're going out of their way to help you. They have so much on their plate. You need to be patient with them. You need to be patient with yourself. You need to be thankful to them. You need to like all those sorts of things. So patience is key in philosophy. Like you said, like take a day off after you wrote like your paper, because it'll give you like a fresh perspective a few days later. It's like, try not to rush this. I am very prone to rushing. As you can see when I'm talking, I'm very animated. I rush everything. I publish like blog posts very quickly. I publish videos very quickly because I'm just hyper. I'm hyper. That's the term for me. Sometimes I struggle sitting still, etc. So yeah. So, but patience is key, and I try to work on that. Again, when I give all these tips, I'm not proclaiming to be on a high horse that I'm like perfect at all these things. Like, no, this is a work in progress. I am a work in progress, right? Like,
it's a seamless accent, man.
Like, I am a work in progress. I'm working on all these things as I'm telling them to you. I'm just trying to help you guys. I'm trying to help all of us. I'm trying to help me. Okay. So yeah, just positive vibes here. because it's the internet, people, we can assume that our viewers are mean, lazy, and stupid. No, they're of course not. But if they were, they'd be like, oh, this kid thinks that he can give us advice, like like that sort of thing. Okay, that's all for the writing process. We could probably move on to submission. Okay, so once you finish all that, you've gotten your feedback, you've written in there, maybe you've sprinkled in a few puns or jokes, etc. You're finally ready for submitting. So yeah, this is a little bit tricky when you're early on in your publishing. Ask the people who you got feedback from where you should submit this. Okay, they're going to be the most helpful. Okay, that's what I did with some of my early papers. Josh Rasmussen was like my main sort of mentor going through all that, and he was able to direct me to the relevant journals that would be best for my paper. So that's the first thing that you should do. Like, you should ask the people who you got feedback from, who are like, in the know, like the professors or the grad students, where do you think this could go? Where is good? And they'll be able to direct you. So yeah, the key thing is finding a journal that's appropriate for your article. The journal's website. So, you can search up these sorts of things. Like, let's just take an example, IJPR, International Journal for Philosophy of Religion. The journal's website, you just search that up, it'll come up. There's like a little Springer page for it. And the journal's website will have instructions on how to submit, where to submit, what to submit, the format of it. It'll tell you how many keywords you need. It'll tell you the size of the abstract that you should have. Yeah. It should tell you roughly the size of the paper. And again, you should probably be thinking about this also when you're going in, like, okay, generally when you're writing philosophy papers, they're going to be between like 5 and 10K usually for how many words they are. So like, keep that in mind. No one's going to publish a 20K article. I can guarantee you that. No one. Like the absolute max is usually 15, and that's only at some select journals where they allow you to go up to that. So like generally they max out at 10. So yeah, just be aware of that. But also, like, look at the particular website and the journal website to see all those instructions and the things. They might also have certain, like, some journals are very lax. They're like, yeah, you don't really need too much formatting. Other ones are like, this needs to be double spaced. If it's not double spaced, we're going to send it right back to you, and you're going to have to effing double space it. That's basically what they tell you. Or some of them are like, has to be Times New Roman, 12-point font, 1-inch margins. If you don't have that, it's like. Some of them are very strict. Other ones are like, yeah, if it gets accepted, we'll tell you what to do. So they like kind of like let you can. So again, just read through that the pages that the journals that the prospective journals. That's very, very important. What are editors looking for? So editors are looking they're looking for the following, or they're asking themselves, is this article within the scope of our journal? Usually they'll have scope and aims on their journal website, right? So click on that. They're going to say, hey, this is for philosophy of religion. We publish mainly in philosophy of religion. And that includes, they're going to specify some topics or whatever. Other ones are like a generalist journal. So they accept basically any area of philosophy. And they have different scopes. So some of them are like highly technical. They're like logic journals. There are other ones that are like explicitly intended to be available, like readable for like an undergrad audience. So like, again, read the aims and the scope as well as the instructions for the relevant journals. So yeah, the editors, like I said, they're asking whether or not it's within the scope of the journal, like your paper. They're asking whether or not your paper advances the discussion, right? Because that's a super duper important thing. They're asking whether or not it's innovative, whether or not it's novel. They're asking if it adds to an active research field. Like, so you might have a novel idea, but like this debate died out in like the 1940s. So like no one cares. so they're looking at if you're adding to like an active field, that's where they're looking at a lot of your citations. So it's important to have like recent citations, or, like to show maybe in the introduction, like, hey, this has been talked about recently, and, give some citations of that. They're going to look at if you're like, basically, if it's scholarly, if it's carefully prepared, if the sentences are nice, they're going to read, maybe they're going to skim it, they're going to look at a few paragraphs, see if you can write. They're going to see if you followed the submission guidelines. They're going to see if you were clear and use concise language. So in general, again, to check if a journal is right for you, you're going to want to read the aims and the scope on the journal website. Consider if other researchers in the area would be interested in this topic. See if the target journal accepts the type of manuscript you want to publish. So those are a lot of the things for publishing, or for submitting. Okay, so that's just the submission process. And then there's post-submission. So do you have anything to say on the submission?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, I think the one thing is, if you get rejected, don't take it personally.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Because sometimes, sometimes like they just have too many submissions and they just have to reject, and it's nothing personal. Maybe your paper would have been another possible world been accepted, but not in the actual world, in this time around. The other thyou too that I wasn't prepared for, but then I was like, no, I should have known that this was going to happen, was, let's say, like, one journal, you want to submit, generally speaking, one journal at a time.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's it. Sorry, that's something that I definitely had to emphasize. So I have to step in here. Do not multi-submit. Do not submit like waving my hands in the air. Do not submit to multiple journals. Do not submit your single paper to multiple journals. Obviously, you can have different papers at different journals, but do not submit a single paper to multiple journals. That is explicitly forbidden, and it's not good.
Yeah.
And they usually say that on the instructions, but do not do that. Also, do not self-plagiarize, so do not take stuff that you have published in the past. So if it's in published, like obviously you could take papers that you've written for your professors and publish those. That's fine. And like, obviously, like you can take stuff from your own blog posts or things like that. But like if you have published it in like a journal or a book or, some published setting, some official published thing, that is self-plagiarism. That is not okay. Don't plagiarize in general, of course, as well, right? So if you're paraphrasing, say that you cite the person that you're paraphrasing. If you are quoting, put it in quotes and cite it, etc. Okay, that stuff is self-evident, but you'd be surprised how much of that goes on. Okay, go on. I interrupted you.
Yeah, well, and bouncing off that just really quick, as soon as you have the paper published, it's not really your baby alone anymore. Right, it belongs to the publisher in a way, and so you have to respect copyright or just other things that go on with the legalities of that. The other thing I wanted to mention was, when I had a paper rejected, let's say from one journal, and let's say the requirement was MLA citation or APA citation, and then I have to go to another journal that says Chicago. Then I have to go back to the paper, change or it's like, we want parenthetical citations, right? And then you put it all in the bibliography. It's like, no footnotes or something, so you have to get ready to do that really annoying restructuring, but that's just part of the game,
Yeah, that is. That is so painful. So EJPR, the European Journal for Philosophy of Religion. I published a paper in there that actually became one of the chapters of my Existential Inertia and Classical Theistic Proofs book. It's on the Neoplatonic proof from Phaser, so they had one of those. They had one of the nice submission processes where, they basically told you some guidelines, but they're like, if it gets accepted later on in the process, you'll have to follow our strict things. But like for submission, it's fine. Like you can have MLA, APA, those sorts of things. So, I did it in my normal. I'd cite Schaffer 2009 or something, in the main text. And then in the bibliography, I'd have the full details. But for the official thing, it's like they have that format where you cite all the details in the footnote. I don't know what format it is, but like you have to give like the volume number, the journal and everything in the footnote or like whatever. It's insane. That is so I had to do it was so annoying. And, I had like 30 citations in that one, maybe even 40. And it was like, oh, okay. Well, anyway, took up a lot of my time. That was so annoying. But anyway, okay. So that's the submission process. And now post-submission. So what do you do in post-submission? Okay. So I mean, here's what happens on the other end, right? So it goes to like the editors or whatever of the journal. They look at it. They look at those things that I was just mentioning. They're going to decide, is this a good fit for our journal? Is it advancing the field? Is it an active field? Does it look like a good paper like on its face? If so, we'll send it out for review. So then what they do is they get two professional philosophers in the field who generally it's people who like actively publish on these topics. Most often it's going to be people who are not sympathetic to your paper, or at least you can expect that. So they send it out. It's generally going to be two people who they send it out to generally. Rare occasions it'll be one. Like if they very strongly trust someone to do that. So like for instance, anyway, I won't give names. Sometimes it's three. Sometimes it might very rarely it might even be four. But generally it's two. And then those guys are basically the reviewers. They read through the paper and then they write up a referee report and they give a verdict. They either say it's going to be rejected, just we're not going to give you any resubmission chances, or they say revise and resubmit. So that does not mean that they are committing to publishing it later on. It just means you revise it and you resubmit it, and we're going to look at it again. Okay, that's just what it means. Sometimes those get accepted later on. Sometimes they don't. It varies. That can also be broken down into a major revision and a minor revision. A
Mhm.
minor revision, you can be pretty happy about that, okay? Because a minor revision generally means that the reviewers that they send it out to, they generally liked it. They have some reservations that you should address, but the editors and the reviewers think that it's, sufficiently minor that you'll probably be able to do it, and it'll probably get published. It's no guarantee, but it'll probably do it. If it's a major revision, then it's basically like as if you're submitting a new paper of sorts, and it's, they want you to do some significant uphaul or upheave or whatever on the paper. So yeah, you're gonna have to address a lot of the objections that the reviewers had. You might have to reformat sections. And in general, this sucks, but in general, the reviewer is always right. What I mean by that is just like, it's like the customer is always right. Even if the customer says 1 + 1 = 5, the customer is right. In general, you are to defer to the reviewer. Now, sometimes that's just not possible because they are so overwhelmingly wrong. But in general, like as you have to be as conciliatory as possible in this. It's a game, unfortunately. But yeah, in general, be very conciliatory as possible. So yeah, and again, it's advised to have like a mentor taking you through this process. When you get a revise and resubmit, like you have to prepare a response to reviewers. So like you're gonna want to ask your advisor or whoever's helping you to like, hey, how should I do this? Or you can just message me and I can send you a draft of a revise. You basically have like a title page which says like, thanks to the editors and the reviewers. I respond to reviewer 1 on these pages and I respond to reviewer 2 on these pages, and you have to address each of their points. So anyway, yeah, so that's after review, you get one of those decisions, and then yeah, another thing is prepare to wait. Again, patience is the name of the game here, so prepare to wait. You can sometimes wait. So generally, it's expected, you're going to wait something like 3 months. Okay, that's general. I've had like 1 or 2 papers where it was like within 2 weeks. The reviewers were on it. Like, wow. Okay. I've had other papers where it's like 16 months. So you're going to have to wait, right? So expect 3 months. That's the expectation. But like, do not be surprised if it goes up to 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. Now, after like, 3 or 4, maybe 4 months, sometimes you can send an email to the editor and be like, hey, it's been 4 months. Would you be able to give me an update? Maybe the reviewers forgot about it. Could you send them an email or something like that? That is sometimes appropriate. Again, just generally ask whoever your advisor is, or ask people higher down or higher up in the field and ask them like, is this a good time to do that, etc. But like I said, be prepared to wait. Reviewers, right? Like these are people who generally, they have families, they have full-time jobs. Usually they are publishing themselves. Usually they serve on like editorial committees. Usually they are reviewers for like multiple papers at one time. Like reviewing your paper is not the top thing, not their top priority. And like for good measure, right? Like they have a life. They have to feed their children. So
don't be a Karen.
Yeah, do not be a Karen. So yeah, generally expect to wait. That's the thing. Another thing, so yeah, we covered you're either going to get a reject and accept or revise and resubmit. Another thing is, like I said, I mean, expect the reviewers to be, this isn't always the case, but I'd say like 65% of the time, the reviewer reports are so stupid. I'm so sorry. Like this is notorious to everyone, especially like reviewer number 2, which they usually put like the better reviewer number 1, or like the person who is more favorable to your paper, and then reviewer number 2 just rips it to shreds.
Right.
Sometimes they like really do rip it to shreds, and it's good because they give like really good criticisms, and you're like, crap. Like sometimes they totally refute your thesis. Other times they just point out like systematic ambiguities and other sorts of problems. But like a majority of the time, not like a super vast majority of the time, but like a majority. So like, again, maybe like 60% of the time, just the dumbest stuff ever. Yeah. Like they're raising like random objections. They're like, oh, like you tell them at the beginning, I'm just going to assume this thesis and I'm drawing out some consequences of it. And these are significant consequences. Reviewer number 2 will say, well, that assumption is false. Like, dude, I am just drawing out consequences from it. Okay. It's irrelevant to say that the assumption is false. I'm just drawing out consequences. Expect reviewer number 2 to say the dumbest thing, or even both reviewers. Like they will raise dumb objections. They will raise irrelevancies. They will raise things that are utterly confused. Okay, that's what they're going to do, and just expect it. That's part of the game. And if you get a rejection on that, like again, like don't take it personally, and just keep swimming. Right? It's that song, just keep swimming, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. So you just have to keep on swimming, right? You get knocked down, you get back up again. That's another song. So just got 2 song references. Yeah, just
you got to keep your head up.
Yeah, you got to keep your head up. Oh, okay. So you just got to keep your head up and keep going. Okay, just put the reviewer. Like, I have had too many like fits of anger because the second reviewer is so like. You get so close to being published at a really good journal, and the reviewer number 2 just raises a confused objection, and it gets rejected. In general, there isn't an appeals process, right? So like, you're not going to be able to be like, but reviewer number 2 was so stupid, like you're not going to be able to say that to an editor. You just have to kind of take it.
Yeah.
This is a rough and fierce game, and you just have to keep going. Just see these putbacks, these put downs, as an opportunity for growth, right? They will help you gain some grit. You can, going forward, right, address the objections, even the confused objections, because that next journal might send it to the same people, and they probably will. And so address the objections that came up in the previous referee reports. Or like make clarifications early on that explicitly preempt those objections. Now, you might still get them, right? Reviewers are that dumb, so you might still get them. But yeah, that's the gist with the reviewers. Again, so expect idiocy. So 40% of the time, roughly for me, 40% of the time it's good. And I've had some like stellar referees. I mean, like stellar. They improve the paper. They're committed to helping you get this published, and they're like really, really good. But that's the rare. Usually they're just decent. They're average. They're good. That's like 40%, and then the other 60% is just crap. So yeah. That's what to expect.
Yeah. I'll say that really quick before we go on to the last thing about publishing a book, which you have more experience in than I do. I think the most charitable thing that you can do in response to some of these, like, kind of more rough reviews is just kind of say at minimum, like, there's a reason why they're saying what they are saying, even if it's wrong or mistaken.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you want to take that into consideration. But there is that, at least for me, I'd say, in my estimation, like that slim 10%. It's like, wait, no, there's nothing redeeming about this comment at all.
Yeah.
And so you got to be ready for those types of things. But I think like you got to be careful about making those judgment calls, because then, if you say that anyone who critiques your paper is just wrong, whatever, then you're going to be, you don't want to be arrogant about this. But once you kind of get the feel for, the field, and kind of yourself more, and the process, you can kind of, I think, more comfortably begin to say, I think that was a bad piece of advice,
Yeah. And again, in general, like I said that, like, so, some people right now who are listening are maybe thinking, well, Joe earlier said the reviewer is always right, but now you're saying that they're like 60% of the time they're just stupid.
Joe Schmid destroyed.
Yeah, dude, those are compatible with one another. Okay, what I mean is that be conciliatory. If they make a bad point, be like, that's a good point. That invites a clarification on this second premise. And I've detailed this clarification in this added footnote that I just add, and direct them to that. Or I detail that clarification earlier on in the paper when I define this, and I point out that it actually has this implication, which kind of circumvents the thing that you're pointing out. And I really thank you for bringing this, because you've improved the paper. And you're like, thank the referee in your response to the referees, or things like that. Yeah. So in general, yeah, take it as an opportunity for growth. And I mean, sometimes it's because you weren't sufficiently clear, or you weren't sufficiently precise, or, you were equivocating, like things like that. So it does give you an opportunity to at least make clarifications. So that's what I mean. Like, the reviewer's always right. Generally be conciliatory, say they're making good points, and revise your paper in response to what they say. And also, you can make your paper more modest than you really think. So like, sometimes the reviewer will give an objection. And their objection will be like, well, if you take this certain view over here, then your argument just completely fails for that view, because it gets around it. And like, maybe you disagree with that, maybe. But like, if you don't want to like pick a bone, and it's somewhat irrelevant to the paper, or it's kind of relevant, kind of not relevant, you could just say, like, in a footnote or something, like, I admit that here's a way to get around the argument. I won't look at this further, but like, thanks to a referee for bringing that up. And for the sake of my argument, let's just treat it as an assumption that this view is false, and let's tease out the implications of that. So like, sometimes you can just be more modest, and you might think inside, like, that view, firstly, is stupid, and secondly, like, it doesn't even have the implication that the reviewer thinks it has. So yeah, sometimes it's called for to spell that out, but other times it's not. Just like, be conciliatory, like, yeah. I admit that that is a way to get around the argument. So you can be more modest than you really think. And, like I said, again, it's kind of a game, and that's one way to play it. And it's a good way to play it because, yeah.
All right, Joe, talk to us about how you go about publishing a book.
Well, so like, it's mainly the same process, but the submission is kind of different, right? So it's like, you have to do like all the research, and you have to do the outline, take it chapter by chapter, right? You just treat each chapter as a paper, and then at the end you kind of collect those together, right? So it's basically like writing 12 papers or something and then collecting them together into a book. And then what do you do? Well, let me talk about my process. So I'm reaching out to these different publishers, and so originally this was a lot different than it was. It was still existential inertia and classical theistic proofs, but the chapters were different, formatting was different. There wasn't as much content, and it was just a solo authored thing. And I was going to different publishers, and the thing that always came up was, do you have a PhD?
Yeah.
No, I don't. I don't have a PhD. I could lie to you, but I'm not going to because maybe Kant's right. So I'm not gonna lie. So no, I'm sorry, Mr. or Mrs. Editor, I don't have a PhD. They respond back, sorry, we're not gonna look at your book. So that happened maybe at like 8 places that I went to, 8 different publishing places. It was consistently, do you have a PhD? If not, we're not even going to consider your book. Okay, so expect that. Thankfully, I just said that I'm a philosopher at Purdue or something. I said something like that to Springer. And I also got on Daniel Linford, and I mentioned that he has a PhD, and he got his PhD. He published. And so I mentioned that, and I also said I'm a philosopher at Purdue, and I've published in these areas, in these journals. Yeah. And so I just didn't mention it. And the editor didn't ask. I mean, if he's watching this right now, I'm sorry.
The book's gonna be revoked tomorrow.
No, yeah. So yeah, I just didn't say anything, and he didn't ask. I'm guessing he just assumed. Which okay, I didn't say anything. And he didn't ask, and he was like, "This sounds like an interesting project." I detailed it, and so then. You have to look. Usually, each of the websites for the publishers have like a forum that you need to fill out. You have to do a lot of research for that forum. That's another thing that I probably talk about. You have to talk about the market and how it'll serve the market, and you have to talk about other competing books and whether they're recent. And it's not good to say that there are no competing books. Why is that not good? Think about that. Because that means there's no market for it, right? So if there are no competing books, you're like, oh, this is not a competitor. This is great. No, that is very bad. So there need to be competing books. You have to detail them, explain how yours is different, how yours will improve. You have to talk about how it fits the publisher, how it advances the field. You have to talk about, oh, here's the rough structure of the book. You have to talk about all this stuff. How are you going to promote it? You have to talk about promotion, man, it's a really interesting process, but you have to fill out these forums for each of the places that you're submitting it to, and sending it to the places. It's like the proposal forum. So yeah, usually that'll be on the publisher's website, and yeah, you fill that out. So I filled that out for Springer, and I sent it to him, and he thought it was really interesting, the editor, and he was like, yeah, let's go for it, and I'll send this out. So they sent it out to reviewers. He sent it out to, I believe, 2 anonymous reviewers. Well, I mean, I guess it could have been. So they do an internal review first. So they do their own editors. They look at the proposal. Sometimes you can send them their book, but it really just depends. If you have already written it, you can send the full book sometimes on the initial talk. But yeah, they do an internal review, and they're like, yeah, we're going to send this out for review. So they do that. And then mine, I think they sent out to 2 reviewers. We got the referee reports back. The referees in general they thought it was really good. So they gave us a few suggestions. But based on that, the Springer editors were like, yeah, we'll go forward with this project, and we'll give you a contract. And so that's what they do. And then, yeah, you just sign the contract, and then again, you wait a long time because they have to format everything and so on. And yeah, so I mean, it's a different process. It's a lot harder. It's a lot harder than, because it's like 12 articles basically. And also, you have to do this whole proposal form, and you have to go through all these third parties and talking to the editors, and it's a lot more waiting. You have to be so patient. You have to be very persistent. Oh my gosh. Patience and persistence are like the two biggest things. But yeah, that's basically how I went about publishing that one.
Yeah, it's a much longer process, and you got to keep on top of things. I remember Eric Ybarra, a friend of mine who published his book on the papacy. he had to wait such a long time in order for the book to like be, ready. And that's not to knock on the publisher. That's just part of the
It's part
reality
of
of
the
the thing.
process. Yeah.
Right. And also, I mean, his book was like over 1,000 pages, I think, originally. And then he had to cut it down or something like that to 700 something pages. And so, I mean, that's understandable. All right. Well, with the time that we have left, Joe, do you mind if we take on some questions from the audience?
Totally cool. So as you're getting those up, I have to plug in my laptop. So I'll be back in like 15 seconds.
All right. Sure thing. All right. So, yeah. And if you have any other questions for Joe, just like start sending them in, or even for me and Joe, whatever, we'll be able to take them. So let's see. Yeah. And I'll try to wrap up the stream, excuse me, in about maybe, 10 minutes. I want to give you enough time to, get all your thoughts out and to have Joe and I be able to give answers. All right, Joe, you ready for the first question?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So here's from Infinitame Zero. Must be pretty hard to ensure you have read all the relevant literature on the subject.
Yeah. So I kind of two notes. So you don't have to read all the relevant literature, but it's important to read like a significant enough chunk of the research which is relevant to your topic. Yeah, it's difficult, right? This is a very difficult process. I mean, it varies by paper, right? So like one of my papers, it was on like explaining why the modal collapse argument doesn't work, but how that leads to maybe some other arguments that are at least more promising. And I had to cite so much from the free will literature. And I had to read. I know. Yeah. And I had to read. Oh man, it was very rough. I had to read a lot of papers for that to cite. But yeah, so like it depends. So like, but that paper is different from some other papers where it's like you have a new idea and it's like just in response to one argument that like only a few people are talking about, right? So like you just have to cite maybe like 3 main things and engage with them and then develop your stuff. So like it depends. It just depends how much reading you're gonna have to do and how much research you're gonna have to do. And again, like I said, you don't have to do all the relevant literature. It's just like a significant enough chunk of it so as to like sufficiently engage with it. It's difficult to tell. This is why you get feedback from people who are in the field and who kind of have a know for this, right? It's like riding a bike, it's like it's difficult to describe this stuff, but after a while you get a sense and you're able to like help other people get a sense who are kind of new to it. So yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, I'd say for me, like, obviously you want to be like pretty well read in the area if you're going to write on it. Because this isn't like a blog post where you can get away with a lot of things. No, this is like going to the experts and the people in the field. So I think the first thing you want to do is like know who the big names are, right? And like cite them, right? Or at least like, include them somehow in the paper if necessary. And then what the other thing I do for research, Joe, is I try to like have the reliable journals that I go to kind of lined up already. So for example, if I'm writing a paper on, let's say, biblical scholarship, I have Catholic Biblical Quarterly, I have all these other journals lined up and ready to go that I'll consult and see, have these journals touched on the subject that I'm looking into. You want to be smart about how you go about it, because obviously if you try to read everything that's been written, that's going to be insane.
Yeah, you're
never going to get that paper published, And I mean, I think for the most part, like people understand, like, not for the most part, I don't think anyone's going to be really offended if you don't mention them, like if they've written on the subject, because I mean, so many people have written something, but you want to make sure that at least, you're keeping up and you're being responsible with it.
Yeah. Especially if it's like, again, it needs to be like directly relevant to your paper. Like if someone published an objection to a premise 2 of your argument, and you do not talk about that objection, that's a problem, right? But like, if you're talking about an argument and like as one of you're just kind of flagging it as an assumption that you're assuming, let's say, a libertarian view of free will, you don't need to read all the literature there. Just be like, listen, I'm just assuming here a version of libertarianism. I'm not going to defend it. For a seminal defense, you can just cite like 1 or 2 people. Right. And then for an overview of the literature, just see X. So then you can just cite like 1 or 2 things. So like that's the sort of thing. Like just know which of the things it falls under, which of the whether it's directly relevant to like a central portion of your paper or whether or not it's one of these sorts of side things. And then just briefly, what really helps with this is or what really helps with getting a grip on what this relevant literature is, of course, yes, asking these other people who are your mentors of sorts, or at least people who are helping you, but also look at the papers that, I gave you some options like Google Scholar, Phil
Mhm.
Papers, etc., SEP, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Look at these, and some of them give kind of like a broad view of the pre-existent literature. They're like, this person argued this, and then there were some responses. Here are those responses. There were some counter responses, and then it's kind of ripe for future research. So like they might only have like 10 or so citations there, and like if you just read those 10, like that could probably get you over the bar, or get you over the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and part of the the research that you're doing, and when you're responding and characterizing somebody's argument, you have an obligation, and to some extent, right, to stay up to date. Because let's say the person has recently published a paper right before you submit your paper, you can't, in good conscience, then send your paper to the publisher or for the editor for consideration when they have just published something new, and it's within your proximity to look at it and see how that affects the paper, even if it's inconvenient for you in the process.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So like that will often be a reason for rejection of papers.
Yeah.
Someone will overlook it. They overlook relevant literature. That is a huge. So like that's a very good criticism from a referee if they can show that you have overlooked relevant literature. That is a very good substantive problem for papers, and a reason why you might get a rejection. So yeah, definitely just beware of that.
All right. This is a question from, let's see, Alethea. How do you know if a topic has been thoroughly written on? How do you determine if an idea has already been put out there?
Really good questions. The simple answer, and of course it's more complex than the simple answer lets on, but the simple answer is that research stage that we talked about earlier on. That's gonna be the key, right? So like you're doing your research, you're looking up keywords, you're looking up. So let's just say you're interested in modal collapse, right? What you're doing, the modal collapse argument against divine simplicity or something. What you then need to do is you need to go on like Google Scholar, you need to go on Phil Papers, you need to go on JSTOR, you need to go on these sorts of things and look up keywords, look up modal collapse, search it, and then it'll give you some papers. Look up divine simplicity, search it. Look up, go to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on divine simplicity. Like look up key terms, right, and see if like the topic has been written on, and that'll give you a good sense. You can also ask professionals in the field, like, hey, are you aware of this? Or like it's not going to be a good idea. So philosophers are hyper specialized. Okay, so that means they focus on like one topic or a few topics, usually in a few different areas, a few topics in a few different areas, but they like hyper focus on those, and they take them to town, and they research a ton of them, right? So like if you're asking me about, for instance, let's say Pascal's wager, like I don't research that, okay? So like I can point you to some of Liz Jackson's papers and things like that, but like I'm not in that. Like I don't, like, even though I'm in philosophy of religion, and that falls in philosophy of religion, right? So someone, you might think you can go up to a philosophy of religion and ask them about a topic, but like they're gonna mainly be able to help you with their particular specialty, right? So try to find the people who have the specialty, right? So if someone specialized on Pascal's wager, like Liz Jackson, ask her about the relevant research that you should be looking at. Don't ask someone who's like an expert on ontological arguments. What should I do with Pascal's wager? Like, so again, it's important to not only go to professionals in the field, but professionals in the field who are specialists on the topic, or at least related topics. They will help you see whether or not this has been thoroughly written on, and whether or not the idea has already been put out there. So the two main things is ask other people who are in the field, and secondly is do the search of the key terms. Find that out in your research stage.
Eli Whaley asks, have you ever dealt with imposter syndrome? Are there constructive ways to overcome it?
Yeah, so some people in the audience might not be aware of what imposter syndrome is. So as I understand it, imposter syndrome is when like you're in an environment, maybe it's a new school, maybe it's around people who are publishing, and you're like there, but you like feel like you don't really belong there. You feel like an imposter of sorts. You don't really feel up to task with the other people there. You're like, why am I here? Why you feel like you don't belong there, even though you're there. You got into the school, So that's a kind of, is that how you understand it as well?
Yeah, basically, and you just feel like you're not qualified.
Yeah,
in a way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, occasionally I've dealt with that. Yeah, but I guess the way to get around it is just to, I mean, firstly, so there are two things. One of them is an elevating strategy, and another one is the de-elevating strategy. Okay, the elevating strategy is to say, listen, like just to give yourself these kind of reminders, factual reminders, mind you, they have to be factual, but factual reminders. Joe, you applied to this place. You put in so much hard work for this. You deserve to be at this school. You know, like if it's an imposter syndrome with respect to a school. So like you put in the hard work. They looked at your application. They said you're good here. So you're there. Like you deserve to be there, right? You put in the hard work. So like for me, this is the elevating strategy. It's elevating you up. And yeah, like I try to tell myself, like, Joe, like you've talked about these things. You've published a book. You've published papers. So like, you know, you belong to be here along with the rest of the philosophical community, right? It's not like, you know, so like that's one way. It's the elevating strategy. The de-elevating strategy is just to recognize, like, yeah, I'm new to this, right? I need to have the requisite humility. I need to have the requisite epistemic humility. I need to have moral humility. I need to recognize that I'm not all that, right? That I'm not the best thing on the block or whatever. I am just this puny human being who is trying their best to get around in the world. And, you know, I'll try my hardest, but I recognize that, you know, I have so much room to improve, right? It's that growth mindset. I have so much room to improve. And so keeping that humility, keeping that like epistemic humility with respect to like the confidence, your beliefs and what you know, recognize the limitations of your perspective, of the research that you've done. So recognizing your limitations, owning them, and a commitment to grow, a commitment to learn, and a commitment also to be kind of morally humble as well. So both the elevating strategy and the de-elevating strategy together, when you combine them, make for a great mix, a great pot that can help you beat imposter syndrome. One of them is elevating you up. You do belong to be here. And the other one is not letting you go too high up and is keeping you grounded, and it's keeping you to have these intellectual and moral virtues.
Yeah. And I mean, like, it's really important that you don't just have one or the other, because if you just have the de-elevating strategy, you're just going to dunk on yourself all the time.
Yeah.
And you actually have a good point. But with the elevating strategy, you can end up not being forgiving of yourself when you do make mistakes, right? And then you just beat yourself up constantly because you're like, no, I was supposed to be this, you know, really smart Giga Chad, and here I am struggling. And it's like, no. There's a nuance here. There, you know, golden mean between the two of them.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, just briefly before we go on to the next question, yeah, you can also not just like be unforgiving toward yourself, but you can start to be resistant to growth, right? So you kind of harden, you kind of, what's the word? Calcitize. I think that's the word. Man, that would have been such a good adjective or whatever to use. But I think it's called calcitize. You know, when like bones, like, or certain things that are not bone, they start to become like really hard, like bone or whatever. So yeah, you can start to like be resistant to growth if you get in that kind of mindset. So you need both of those strategies, the elevation strategy and the de-elevation strategy.
All right. Alethea has another question. How much did Daniel Linford contribute to the book? This is for Joe.
Yeah, so he contributed a lot on the stuff in there in relativity. He contributed a lot on updating the existential inertia literature in light of relativity. He added certain objections in different, you know, like the classical theistic proofs stuff. He helped with the formulations of the existential inertia theses. So his hands were in basically every single chapter. Both of our hands were in every single chapter. There are certain chapters where, you know, like I wrote most of it. There are other chapters where, you know, like, or at least major sections where he wrote almost all of it or all of it. He helped on the stuff on causal simultaneity. So it's actually really difficult to say how much he contributed to the book. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's what I'll say.
All right. Alethea asked the question as well. How do you find your niche? How do you know it is a niche? How you said you were lucky in finding the topic of existential inertia before. Yeah.
So let me say something on that. So remember at the pre-writing stage, I think we called it, we had the idea, right? That was like the first thing we started with. It's very helpful if your idea is on something which has a manageable literature behind it, is cutting edge, and is significant. I kind of got lucky with existential inertia there. Like I could count the papers published on that on like one hand when I started off on this, started researching that. So it was a very manageable literature. Another thing about it was it's very significant. It has to do with you know, arguments for God's existence, and you know, it's like it has to do with metaphysics, so it intersects a bunch of different fields. and it's also cutting edge. Like the papers that were being published, like they were starting to, the literature was starting to snowball. They were starting to, build up. So I did get kind of lucky in that. So you do have to kind of find your niche. And I found one there. I have other topics that I research on. Like right now, almost like a lot of papers of mine under review are on like infinity and infinity paradoxes and causation and patchwork principles and modality and things like that. But how do you find a niche? I don't know. You stumble upon it. You look at your interests. You look at what you're good at. You look at when you're reading papers, what captivates you. Like I said, go to like journals and read recent issues. Like that's giving you a glimpse into like what's some cutting edge research in the topics that I'm interested in. So like I said, go to like religious studies. Look at some of the recent papers that have been published there. Like scroll through their recent issues the past year or two. Same with IJPR. Same with EJPR, like European Journal for Philosophy of Religion, etc. So yeah, I guess let me pull up something because I actually took notes from I was listening to a lecture the other day, and it was on good work. So apparently there's been psychological research on good work.
Are you going to share your screen?
Oh, no. It's really short. Good work combines what we're good at, so our excellence, what we're passionate about, so that's like engagement, something that we're engaged with, and thirdly, what we value, like our ethics. So 3 E's. Mm-hmm. Good work combines excellence, engagement, and ethics. We're good at it, it engages us, and it meshes well with our values and our ethics. So that's a tip how you can try to find your niche. It's something that, let's say you are, like you have ideas on it, you've thought about it, so that's kind of your excellence there. You have a publishable idea-ish. You're passionate about it, you're engaged on it, you're interested in it, right? So like when you read papers, like this is stuff that you're interested in, and it meshes well with what you value. Like yeah, I mean that one's kind of like if you're interested in philosophy, pretty much like if it's a philosophical topic, it's probably going to mesh with your ethics. But so yeah, I guess those 3 E's, as well as just finding stuff that's like reasonably new and reasonably cutting edge. It's difficult, and there's some luck involved, and there's chance involved, and yeah.
Okay, I'll take this last question, and then there are some fun comments that I would be, remiss if I didn't mention. So Alethea asked once again, Suan, where are you with the papacy book? I know you are starting it. So yeah, I mean, there have been multiple times in the past where I said like I wanted to write a book on the papacy, but then I just got kind of cold feet, and I didn't feel like I was ready yet. And then more recently, in light of like the new kind of, the 4-hour lecture that I did, all the research that went into that, my time with the Dominicans and taking a break, and then with the, Cameron's conversion, and me sitting down now, getting ready to give the updated new stuff with the argument, I was able to like make a lot of pieces click together. Like I was able to come up with an exegetical framework for interpreting typology. And now my research is taking me into the book of Acts, and not just, Matthew and Isaiah, but it's now expanding really into a biblical theology of Peter. And I think I'm ready now to really sit down and put the work on this. And so, I have a basic kind of proposal ready, and I have someone who's kind of helping me get all this ready. But, I'm hoping that I could get a manuscript finished in like 5.5 months for everything that I want to do with this book. So we'll see what happens. So Joe, once again, people are mentioning that you look like Tom Holland and Spider-Man. And I don't know, do you ever get tired of that, Joe?
Honestly, I kind of don't. I kind of think it's funny because like I can see the resemblance, etc. Sometimes like people on my videos, like on my, like everyone has said this for years. And so sometimes I get a comment, it's like, did you know that you look like, it's like, yes, of course I know that. So like when they say, did you know, I'm like, okay, that's kind of annoying. But if they just point it out, that's fine with me. I think it's kind of fun and funny. Whenever I see new comments on it and I'm in a playful mood, I'm just like, that's because I am Tom Holland. I say things like that.
Let's see. Okay, Guarded Acumen has this funny comment. Joe, when will you start defending the truth of presentism? Abandon your eternalist sympathies.
Hey, I'm agnostic on the matter, so I have sympathies in some sense with both presentism and eternalism. So yeah, I used to be a lukewarm presentist, and I used to call myself that, but man, general and special relativity, and it's all very difficult, and there are reasonable considerations on both sides. So honestly, I kind of don't know, but I know Guarded Acumen is a diehard presentist. So,
all right, Joe. Actually, sorry, I wanted to get just one more question, and here it is. Would Joe essentially give the same advice for writing/publishing a book as a paper? You can kind of give a summary because we touched on that a little bit. And also any advice for people not in school who would like to publish?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd give the same advice for the idea for the book and for the writing process and for the research. You could treat the book as basically 12 separate papers. Or, I say 12. I mean, that's because I think that's the number of chapters that I had. But, whatever number of chapters between maybe, 5 and 15 or something, however many chapters you have, think about that as like 5 to 15 papers that you're going to write. Mm-hmm. So, yes, it's basically like the same thing, each of those. But, of course, you have to sort of thematically unify them, and thematically tie them, and have relevant transitions and interbook references or whatever. So it's basically the same thing. And then, yes, as for publishing it, it's slightly different. You have to have a book proposal. You have to talk about the market. You have to talk about how you're going to promote it. You have to talk about, at least for a lot of proposals. Yeah. Whereas with a paper, you kind of just do that in the intro. You sometimes say like, oh, this is, this touches on these other people who've recently written stuff, but like you have to spell that out a lot in a proposal. You have to be very explicit, and then it's going to be much longer for publishing a book. The process is much longer. There's a lot more bureaucratic hurdles. If you don't have a PhD, it's going to be very difficult. But I mean, there are ways, like if you have other people who are kind of associated with an academic press, or people who are in the know and they can like vouch for you, like that can help, etc. It's still going to be, it's still going to be difficult without a PhD, but you could do it, evidently. And then, any advice for people not in school who would like to publish? So it kind of depends where you are. So like when you're writing these papers, one thing that I forgot to mention is that you have to have, usually it's in like a title page. It's not a big deal, but you just put the title, you put the abstract in there. I mean, you have the title and the abstract in your paper, but they also want it separately in a page. So you put like the title, the abstract, the keywords, usually declarations. So what you just say there is like, there are no conflicts of interest. I don't have any funding. You just say things like that. This is in your title page. It's usually only one page. You also need I forgot to mention this. Now I'm embarrassed. You have to publish generally, not always, but generally, it's advised that you have an ORC ID. So, or I think some people say it's an ORCID or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But an ORC ID is like a unique researcher identification number. It's kind of like your student number, when you're like at a university. But it's like, it's your profile as a researcher. And it's basically a network that all the researchers are on, and it associates your papers with you, and it like the database has your like email in it and so on. So you just go, in order to get that, it's free, right? You just go to orcid.org or whatever, or ORCID, and it's like a 16-letter thing. And yeah, you also have to include that in your title page. That's sometimes required for journals. It's very, again, like I said, it's free. It's easy to set up. And then you also have to have your institutional affiliation. That's the reason why I brought this up. So that usually doesn't matter, right? It's not like in general, like this publishing process is totally anonymized. Like your name is not on this stuff. That's why you have a separate page with all that. And usually like the editors who are making a decision on your paper don't know your identification. They don't know whether or not you're associated with an institution. It removes a lot of bias. So it doesn't really matter that you're not associated, like that you're not at a school and that you can't say like Purdue University on your thing, right? It doesn't really matter. But like when you're writing that title page, you want to say something like independent researcher, something like that. Like you're not affiliated with an institution. But other than that, I mean, my advice is basically the same as sort of what I've been going through. Now, I guess it might be difficult to make connections with, like I said, professors earlier, like professors are the people who are going to be like reading your papers potentially, or like grad students. So what should you do if you're not at a university? I mean, sometimes you can like email a professor and say, hey, I'm really interested in your work and I kind of want to get into publishing. Would you be able to read this paper? Now, sometimes if you're having trouble and people and professors are, and I should have said this earlier as well, if you're having trouble and professors are like, no one's wanting to read your paper, just like give them a section, right? Say, hey, this is only 1 page long and I'd love for your feedback on this section, or like it's 2 pages long. So you can like ask for feedback on sections, right? Things like that. So that's another idea. But yeah, just email people, right? That they're very willing to help. I mean, again, like don't email Swinburne and ask him to read your paper and give feedback. Like that's a bit out there. But But like, hey, you talk to people in the Reason and Religion Facebook group, and there are some professional philosophers in there, and there are some other people who are grad students who are just finishing up the grad school. Like, send them a message. They're like, hey, I got this paper. Would you be able to help? Or things like that. But yeah.
All right. Well, Joe, that's all the questions I have for you tonight, and I think that's all the audience has for tonight. Joe, I mean, I know that you have your blog, Majesty of Reason, your YouTube channel by the same name, academia page. Where else can we find you? Or did I cover all the bases?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have this website which is kind of like a hub for everything. It's like, I think it's josephschmid.com. So I mean, people can go there, and that has my papers and so on. My Phil Papers profile, that's like the philosopher's Tinder of sorts, basically. So like, it just has publications on there. And so, yeah, people can check that out. But the main thing, I guess, is the YouTube channel. That's what that's where I'm mainly located.
All right. Well, Joe, it was great having you on the show, and I'm always happy to see you, and I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, this was wonderful. Thanks again, Suan, and I hope the audience could benefit from this.
Yeah. Never can on my days feeling numb. Propane raps, Hank Hill with the tongue. Slow days on my own way to the grave. I'm a cold case, no cocaine on the gum.
See me down, under, up, down, slam down with the thunder.
Yeah.
Ice cold moves, move hot like the summer. Grinding 100 times too when the box lights up, going up till we run it.
It's me, verse the universe, a runner, and we done 100%. The game damn near nothing. If y'all can't stomach the work, you won't serve me a word, you keep running.
Get a taste of the falls, hit the walls on the daily. Facing phases to my face, nothing phase me. Besides a lot of things on my mind I need to say.
Bit afraid,
So I guess they can wait just another day.
I think I might be A-okay.
If I wait just another day, I got to tell ya, getting blinded by the lights. I got to tell ya, about the chaos in my mind. I got to tell ya, all these nights we're not together. Forgot to tell you,
Yeah,
forgot to tell you.
I got to tell you, I ain't tryna make no promise. Not nothing that could weigh down conscious. Pay the bills and rest fill pockets. Still sometimes you be obnoxious.
Just want it different when I'm having you around me. All night, no sleep, we down here. Whenever we hear no problems. Losing track of time till it finds us.
Down with you till I make me 1,000. White picket fence, pool house lounging. Sounded good to me if you round with it. I killed the demons, we hit the ground running.
My stress gon' need a vest round the chest. Reshape my world in 7 days or less. On the chase like the days chase ice cream trucks. Got us moving fast, but it's never enough.
Yeah, I know that the weather was rough, but it won't stop us.
Yeah, shit is never enough. I got to tell you, getting blinded by the lights. I got to tell you, about the chaos in my mind. I got to tell you.